Oh, this is nice. It's about presence, isn't it? It's about being here and connecting. So this talk, I knew Elizabeth would be here, and you know, you're going to recognize this because we were together at the TED Talks at Stanford in April because I was we were both proud recipients of the auction item that JD was selling for a day at Stanford, and it was a gift I wanted to give to my brother, and that was what he chose, was the day of the TED Talks. And one of the talks has just, you know how it just like bores into you? And this talk was by Carolyn Winterer, who's the director of the Stanford Humanities Center, and she's a historian, and she talked about the pursuit of happiness. And it just bore into me, as I said. And I'm sort of an amateur historian myself because I know that it's all happening right now, right? I mean, there really isn't any past or future. It's all right now, and it's all within us. And especially these days with you know, some of the recent events, it's tuned me in more to our history and really how young we are as a nation and how fragile we are as a democracy and how we have to really reinvent that every single day. So we're going to talk today about happiness and perhaps how we can pursue it differently than we usually do. This is my first time using PowerPoint in talks, so that's kind of exciting. So if you Google the word happiness, there's like a million books. You know, there's the Happiness Advantage, the Happiness Equation, the 20-Day Happiness Challenge, the Happiness Hypothesis, the Happiness Project, Resisting Happiness. So we're fascinated by this idea that we're pursuing our own happiness. And in fact, happiness was written into this founding document of our country, and I bet every one of you know these words, and let's recite them together. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so these are really loved words, you know, words that we hold very sacred, but they're also very misunderstood. So these founding mothers and fathers who came before us have a lot of things to tell us that might be useful. And so since there wasn't internet back then, and there wasn't computers back then, and there wasn't ways to really write down the buzz that was going on, you know, even if you go back in your mind 10 years, it gets a little fuzzy, right? I mean, I was here 9 years ago, and that's fuzzy for me. 20 years ago, there weren't any iPhones, and the Spice Girls were the rage, and Ellen DeGeneres came out. 40 years ago, no desktop computers, and the first Star Wars movie, and you could buy a brand new house for under $50,000. So try going back 300 years, you know, the kind of buzz that was going on at that time, and you can imagine the level of misunderstanding for what people said started to ratchet up. Because there was a buzzword at the time, like we have fake news as a buzzword now, and that buzzword was public happiness. And people talked about this idea of public happiness. In fact, did you know that when Thomas Jefferson originally wrote these words, he put in public happiness? And Benjamin Franklin, who was the editor of the Declaration, said, you know, everybody knows that it's about public happiness. Everyone knows that the only kind of happiness is public happiness, so it'll sound better if we just say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so that's what happened. But there was this idea, this thread of an idea, this pearl of an idea. So what did people mean at that time when they talked about public happiness? Well, they were thinking about a larger good. They were thinking about a government that was an umbrella for these structures and this stability where everyone would have these same rights, of course, except for the people that were enslaved, but that was, you know, a different... that was something different, right? So they wanted this idea where as many people as possible could flourish. Many people as possible could live abundantly. As many people as possible could see that only private happiness could only come into being after a public happiness. John Meacham, who, anybody watch Bill Maher on Friday nights? He had John Meacham on again this week, and I love him. He was the editor of Newsweek for many years, and he wrote a book called Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. And he said for Jefferson, happiness was not about yellow smiley faces, self-esteem, or even feelings, It was instead about virtue, good conduct, generous citizenship. He envisioned a happiness that would shape not only our internal world, but the world around us. So isn't this interesting? Because I've known that I wanted to speak about this today. And where is Monticello? Virginia. And where in Virginia is it? Charlottesville. So there's no, I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning, just kind of with chills about all this, because I was really disturbed. And how can we not be disturbed? And then I found this prayer. I saw your great post this morning. I go on Facebook about once a month, but I went on this morning and Dave wrote a beautiful piece. And Silent Unity came out with that prayer that I shared this morning. Because how do we hold all this? How do we continue to hold all this and continue to call it good? How do we call it happy? Sometimes we hate you, and sometimes we love you, and when we hate you, it's because we love you, right? The divine paradox. So this idea of public happiness, again, is this great, beautiful umbrella that would be created where all of us could work together as citizens and have good government and good society. So Deborah Winter also asserted, it was very interesting, that it's useful sometimes to think about these concepts as their opposites. So the opposite of private happiness would be sadness, maybe, But the opposite of a public happiness is something that would be much worse. It would be tyranny. It would be anarchy. And so why did they have this idea? If we go back to 1776, the 13 colonies are in this sort of crucible of crisis. I mean, here they are rebelling against the largest empire the world had ever seen, the British Empire. And they, in this foolhardy way, decide that that with no army and no navy and no history of working together, that they could fight against this most powerful empire the world had ever seen. And under this concept, came this idea of public happiness. That it was going to be this great shield, which they could build the first republic that lasted, because the republics hadn't lasted before. And so they were afraid of a lot of things. And again, I got this from Deborah Winter. I love this idea. They feared the enemies on the outside, the British, of course, but also the Spanish and the French, who didn't wish them well at all. I mean, this was something so revolutionary that they were proposing. They feared anarchy within, because what's the best way to have, if there's already a rebellion going on the outside, what about a rebellion for the people that are enslaved? So there was that concern that there would be a rebellion from within. Tyranny, that there would be, again, there'd be return of a king who would tax them without representation, which they believed to be the worst kind of tyranny, that they would have to be paying for something that wasn't coming back to them as their some kind of good. See, we know from our practices of absolute abundance and from tithing that we give because it's our nature to give. It's what we do, and as we give, that flow continues to happen. We don't give and then it stops. We give and that flow continues to happen. And finally, they were afraid of this vulnerability of democracy. Because institutions that are created by the people and for the people are very vulnerable. They're inherently subject to the failures of human beings. Anyone familiar here with Hamilton, the show or the music? Do you remember that great thing where the king goes, "You'll be back"? Because you don't know how to do this. Okay, you got your freedom, you won the war, but you don't know how to do this. You're going to be back. I love that. That show. Who saw the show? Okay, and who listened to the music? Yeah, we listened to the music. In fact, Hal, as you know, Hal was here recently speaking with you, and he shared with you his experience with aphasia, which is, challenged with him with language. So he listened to the music and read the words, so he was really ready for when we saw the show. And then after we saw the show, we listened to the music again. And it just gave it a whole other piece, that progression of how incredible our founding mothers and fathers were. how incredible we are to be here right now, to be able to look at our history that different way. So if you haven't, I really encourage you to at least listen to the music. It will change you in a very good way. It's very hard to uphold a democracy, just like it's very difficult for us to hold on to our spiritual knowing every day, isn't it? We have to practice every single day, every single moment. You know, that's why we come together and do it as a group, because what we do here, you can do at home, you can watch a video, you can listen to something, you can read something. But when we come together and practice the presence together, to worship together, to look and say, who I am is who you are, that I can look at you with that namaste, I can say that in me which is holy and wonderful and forgets, but I can look at you and see that same thing and you can remind me. What a holy and wonderful thing that is. And there isn't room there for hatred and bigotry. I don't know if any of you saw the little clip that was on CNN spoken by the governor of Virginia last night, but it was very impassioned and very short, and he said there is no room in his state and in our country for anything less than to be united. Wow. George Washington. There's nothing, read this with me, there's nothing which can better deserve your patronage than the promotion of science and literature. Knowledge is in every country the surest basis of public happiness. Public happiness. And so what was created then to protect and to promote this idea of public happiness are three branches of government. John Adams is talking about the judiciary. And he said there's no subject is more interesting than this to the public happiness, that there's this independent judiciary that's free from influence from the other branches of government. And Jefferson, again, talking about the legislative, he said the zeal and wisdom of our legislators who lay the foundations of public happiness in wholesome laws, the second branch of government. And Noah Webster, who was that great, what's the word, lexicographer? Is that it? Lexicographer. And he was a great abolitionist. In fact, he said slavery impedes the public happiness. And he coined words for the first American dictionary in the 1800s, words like skunk and canoe that hadn't been around before, because there were other people here, you know, there weren't native people. He was talking about the executive branch, and he said it's very dangerous for a nation to have its public happiness on virtues and vices of a single man. It's kind of like he's talking to us today. So we wouldn't be very unity, right, if we didn't look at this metaphysically. So here we have these three branches again. We have our legislative aspect of mind. We have all these voices, right? We have our formative factors, we have our family, we have our education, we have our views and opinions and ideas based on the extreme right of center. We have our views, opinions, ideas on the extreme left of center. We have everything in the middle. We have what's in our head and what's in our heart. And we listen and we discern. And then we discern through our judiciary aspect of mind, that law, that spiritual law, when we know what to say yes and when we know what to say no to, that discernment. And it's all guided by the executive aspect of mind, we hope. Charles Fillmore and the Atom Smashing Power of the Mind. Do you know that book? Isn't that a great title? The Atom Smashing Power of the Mind? He wrote that in the 20s. He said, the work of the Holy Spirit is the executive power of mind and idea, carrying out the creative plan. Wow. Mind, idea, expression. Our Holy Trinity in unity. That an idea is in mind. And out of that is our creation of our country, of our ideas, of our worship spaces, of our unity. And finally, they set up something to protect, to make sure that this public happiness would be maintained into the future. And that's our Constitution. This is from a letter from the U.S. House of Representatives to George Washington right after the Constitution was ratified, and read this with me. To guard our free and happy Constitution against every machination and danger, and to make it the best source of public happiness. How do we continue to shore up our own internal practices? What is it we do? What is it we can do? What is it I do? I know that I've spent more time being disturbed this year than I ever have. And there's a lot of reasons that could be, and I'm responsible for all of them. But there's something about listening. There's something about reading, there's something about discerning, there's something about my own practice, my own morning writing practice, my own prayer practice, my own meditation practice, my own yoga practice, all those things I do. You know, there's a myth about the condor and the eagle. Are you familiar with this? Mm-hmm. So the eagle, for 500 years, according to some native practices, the eagle has been just slashing and burning pretty much for 500 years. And the condor hasn't yet been able to come in and balance it. And the condor really brings more of a sense of peace and oneness. And so those who work with these myths and these stories believe that now is the time that they'll be flying together. And so that's what we do. I want to do this prayer again because I haven't really spent enough time with it myself. It just came through. Let's take these words in. So we're asserting that there is only one race, the human race. We're uniting our hearts and our minds in divine love and rejecting the idea that there is an other. You know, this idea of the other, of the adversary, of the devil, that really isn't in the Bible. It was something created as just the other, the mirror image. It isn't a separate force. We don't believe that in unity, right? We don't believe that there's a force of evil. We do believe that people do evil things, but there's no force, there's no other. There's no adversary. Really, the only adversary is the one that says, I hate you, I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you, I love you, because I love you. And we do that. But there is this one presence and one power active in our lives and in the universe. Active. And that is God the good, or whatever we want to call him. It's not an other. We say to those with hearts of hate, we will light the way to your heart's healing. We will love you into your humanity. So unity for years has been, dismissed by some as being too much about light and love and not reality. But we don't deny that. We know about those hard times. We know about people disrespecting each other. We know about being enslaved, whether it is actually physically or with our own minds because of what our life has been and who has had that influence on us and the overcoming that we've done. Absolute abundance. What does that mean? Absolute abundance. We talk about God as the absolute. Absolute. The absolute. And so here we are, right? On the precipice, but we're sitting down. We have, American history is about finding this balance between the personal pursuit of prosperity, this personal pursuit of abundance, this personal pursuit of happiness, and at the same time this public idea of our common wealth, our public good. Remember, Jefferson said not only our eternal worlds, but the worlds around us. And so this public happiness, this private happiness envisioned by our founding mothers and fathers, is bigger than our individual well-being. It's about unity. And when Charles Fillmore named this, he said it's about unity because we are all one. And the best way I know is by being absolutely true and honest to self. So what would that take? So it's not about being happy because everything's kind of nice up here. It's about that real, true knowing. What makes you happy? What is your pursuit of happiness? How do you see private happiness, public happiness? Are they different? Is it the same thing? How are you lined up within yourself? How are you aligned? How are your relationships? What really keeps you happy? What makes you happy? What's that substance? Remember, faith is that perceiving power of the mind linked with the ability to shape substance. Isn't that beautiful? Charles Fillmore. That's his definition of faith. The perceiving power of the mind, the perceiving power of the mind linked with the ability to shape substance. And substance is that mind stuff that we create something. These new chairs are substance. Did they just come out of thin air? How long did it take to get these chairs? How many years to get these chairs? How many chiropractors made money off of all of us sitting in those other chairs? Right? Faith, the perceiving power of the mind linked with the ability to shape substance. So I was thinking, what's the call to action here? You know, when they trained us to speak, you know, it was like, you have to have you got to have the need, and you got to have the call to action. I can't even do any of that anymore, because I don't do this much anymore, obviously. I'm kind of, all I can do is, where am I right here today? I can't create a lesson for you last week or even yesterday and have it be relevant today. It's only relevant right now, and that makes it much more difficult, but also easier. But you know, it's sloppy. Because we're sloppy, we're messy. Isn't that wonderful? That we're messy and sloppy and not slick? Oh dear. I so wanted to be slick, but it just never really happened for me. We are just right here. So, you know, the best thing is to take this into the quiet. Let's take this into our meditation.